When a narcissistic woman betrays you, the first thing that quietly but decisively begins to crumble is her primary source of emotional fuel, validation. This is not something she consciously thinks about in healthy terms, because narcissistic validation is not about mutual appreciation or love. It is about control, reflection, and reassurance of superiority. During the relationship, especially if you are emotionally grounded, attentive, and masculine in your frame, you became a dependable mirror. You reflected her desirability, her importance, her power, and her identity back to her. She didn't just enjoy your presence, she fed on the emotional certainty you provided. Betrayal in her mind is not a loss at first. It feels like liberation. It feels like she has outgrown you, upgraded, or outsmarted the situation. She assumes that validation will continue flowing effortlessly from new sources, just as it always has. Initially, there is a sense of excitement and superiority. She tells herself stories that justify her actions. She convinces herself that you are holding her back, that you didn't appreciate her enough, that she deserves more. This self narrative is essential for her ego to function. Narcissistic personalities cannot sit comfortably with guilt or responsibility. Betrayal, therefore, must be reframed as empowerment. She may even feel a rush in knowing she hurt you or escaped before you could leave her. In this phase, she believes she is winning. She expects you to react emotionally: anger, sadness, desperation, confrontation. Any of these reactions would reassure her that she still matters deeply to you, and that reassurance would stabilize her inner world. But something very different happens when you don't react the way she expects, when you disappear emotionally, when you stop engaging, when you don't plead, don't argue, don't try to fix things, and don't orbit around her waiting for answers. This is where the collapse begins, though it often starts subtly. At first, she rationalizes your absence. She tells herself you're hurt and will come back. She assumes your silence is temporary or strategic or immature. Narcissists are experts at denial because denial protects the ego. But as days turn into weeks and your emotional energy is clearly no longer available, a quiet discomfort begins to set in. Validation is not optional for a narcissistic woman, it is psychological oxygen. Without it, she begins to feel restless, irritable, and internally unsettled. She may seek reassurance elsewhere, posting more provocative photos, flirting more aggressively, seeking attention in social settings, or immersing herself in a new relationship. But here's the problem she doesn't want to face: not all validation is equal. What she received from you was consistent, deep, and stabilizing. It wasn't just surface level attraction or tension. You knew her, you understood her moods, you gave her a sense of being chosen, prioritized, and emotionally anchored. New sources may give excitement, novelty, or lust, but they don't provide the same grounding effect. As this reality slowly sinks in, she begins to notice an emotional emptiness that she can't quite name. She may feel bored, anxious, or dissatisfied even when surrounded by people. She may start to feel irritable for no clear reason. This is because the mirror she relied on is gone, and without that mirror, she is forced, however, briefly to confront herself. Narcissists struggle deeply with self reflection. When there is no external source reinforcing their identity, insecurity rushes in to fill the space. The questions she avoids begin to whisper in the background. Why doesn't he care anymore? Why isn't he trying? What if I misjudged him? These questions are dangerous to her ego, so she pushes them away, but they don't disappear. The collapse of validation becomes more pronounced when she realizes you're not only gone, but stable. If she hears through mutual connections that you're calm, improving your life, focusing on your purpose, or even just unbothered, it hits her like a quiet shock. Narcissistic validation thrives on emotional impact. Your indifference is not neutral, it is threatening. It suggests that her influence over you has ended. And to a narcissistic woman, losing influence feels like losing identity. She may begin checking your social media, rereading old messages, or replaying moments in her mind where she felt powerful in your presence. This is not nostalgia for love. It is nostalgia for certainty. At this stage, panic can begin to emerge beneath the surface. Narcissists rarely show panic openly. Instead, it manifests as impulsive behavior, emotional volatility, or sudden attempts to reassert control. She may test the waters by sending a casual message, liking an old photo, or finding an excuse to cross your path. These are not acts of remorse. They are attempts to confirm that she still exists in your emotional world. If you respond with warmth or engagement, even briefly, the validation supply stabilizes again. But if you don't, if you remain calm, brief, or completely unavailable, the collapse accelerates. Without consistent validation, her internal world becomes chaotic. Self doubt creeps in, but because narcissists cannot tolerate self blame, that doubt often turns outward. She may tell herself that you are weak, that you never mattered, that she never really cared. This is ego defense, not truth. The intensity of the narrative is proportional to the threat she feels. The more she insists she's fine, the more unstable she actually is inside. The absence of your attention forces her to confront a painful contradiction. If she truly upgraded and moved on, why does your absence feel so unsettling? Over time, the loss of validation affects her self esteem in ways she doesn't fully understand. She may become more sensitive to rejection from others. She may feel unusually affected when someone doesn't text back, doesn't show interest, or doesn't prioritize her. What she lost with you wasn't just affection, it was emotional regulation. You were a stabilizing force. Without that force, she is at the mercy of her fluctuating self image. Some days she feels superior and untouchable. Other days she feels invisible and deeply insecure. This emotionally whiplash is exhausting, and she doesn't consciously connect it to losing you, but the connection is there. This is why the realization that she has truly lost you is so destabilizing. It's not the loss of the relationship that hurts the most. It's the loss of what the relationship provided to her psyche. When she understands that you are no longer accessible, no longer reactive, no longer emotionally invested, a deep sense of powerlessness sets in. Narcissists fear powerlessness above all else. Love can be replaced, attention can be sourced elsewhere, but the loss of a reliable validation anchor creates a wound that doesn't heal quickly. And here's the part most men don't realize. Your strength in walking away with dignity is what makes the collapse permanent. If you had begged, chased, or tried to prove your worth, she would have absorbed that energy and moved on without consequence. But by removing yourself completely, you forced her to face a rare experience emotional silence from someone who once mattered deeply. That silence echoes louder than any argument ever could. It disrupts her internal narrative and creates a crack in the illusion of endless control. When a narcissistic woman betrays you, she expects chaos, not necessarily because she wants pain, but because chaos confirms relevance. Emotional reactions are her proof of impact. Anger tells her she still has power. Sadness tells her she mattered. Arguments tell her she still occupies space in your mind. Even cold resentment keeps the emotional cord intact. What she does, asterisk not expect, and what she is profoundly unprepared for, is your absence of reaction, your silence, your calm, your decision to walk away without trying to win, explain, or reclaim her. This is where reality begins to break through the fantasy she built around herself. At first, she interprets your lack of reaction incorrectly. She assumes you are stunned, processing, or temporarily withdrawn. Narcissistic personalities are deeply confident in their emotional influence, so it never crosses her mind that you might genuinely be done. She believes time will soften you, that curiosity will bring you back, or that loneliness will make you reach out. This assumption allows her ego to remain intact in the early stages. She tells herself that she still holds the upper hand, that you are simply playing a role in the drama she expects to continue. But as time passes, something begins to feel wrong. The emotional noise she anticipated never arrives. No late night messages, no emotional confrontations, no attempts to talk things through, no visible suffering. This absence is confusing because narcissists rely on emotional feedback to orient themselves in relationships. When there is no feedback, there is no confirmation of power, and without power, the internal narrative starts to wobble. She may initially feel irritated rather than worried. Irritation is safer than vulnerability. It allows her to maintain the belief that you are being immature, stubborn, or prideful rather than accepting that you are genuinely disengaged. Reality hits harder when she realizes that your silence is consistent. Consistency is what changes everything. A few days of distance can be dismissed. A week can be rationalized. But sustained emotional absence forces a confrontation she cannot avoid. The truth begins to surface in uncomfortable ways. She no longer has access to you. She no longer controls the emotional temperature. She no longer controls the emotional temperature. She no longer dictates when and how you interact. For someone used to steering the emotional dynamic, this loss of control is deeply unsettling. It's not dramatic at first. It's quiet like a slow pressure building under the surface. What truly accelerates this realization is your composure. If she sees or hears that you are calm, focused, or even improving your life, it disrupts her expectations entirely. Narcissistic betrayal often carries an unspoken assumption that you will be diminished by it, that you will be destabilized, that your confidence will erode. When that doesn't happen, it challenges the story she told herself to justify her actions. If you were truly inadequate, weak, or replaceable, your strength wouldn't make sense. Your stability becomes evidence that her narrative might be flawed. This is where cognitive dissonance sets in. On one hand, her ego insists she made the right choice. On the other hand, your lack of reaction suggests she may have miscalculated. Narcissists struggle intensely with cognitive dissonance because it threatens their self-image. Rather than resolving it through honest reflection, she oscillates emotionally. Some moments she feels superior and relieved. Other moments she feels anxious and unsettled. She may begin replaying past interactions, looking for signs that you were more valuable than she allowed herself to admit. This replaying is not about missing love, it's about trying to restore certainty. As your emotional distance becomes undeniable, a deeper fear begins to surface: irrelevance. Narcissistic women fear being irrelevant more than being alone. Being alone can be framed as independence. Being irrelevant cannot. Your silence communicates something devastating to her ego: that she no longer has emotional significance in your life. This realization doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in during quiet moments when distractions fade, late at night during idle scrolling, in between conversations that feel shallow or performative. She may suddenly feel an urge to reach out, not because she wants reconciliation, but because she wants confirmation that she still matters. If she tests the waters and receives no response, or a response that is neutral, brief, or emotionally detached, the impact is profound. Neutrality is more damaging than hostility. Hostility still implies emotional investment. Neutrality implies closure. It tells her that the emotional bond she relied on has been severed. This is often when regret begins to form, but it is a specific kind of regret. It's not remorse for betrayal, it's regret for losing access. She regrets for losing access. She regrets misjudging how final your departure would be. She regrets assuming you would always be available. At this stage, reality no longer feels abstract, it feels personal. She begins to understand that you are not waiting, you are not stuck, you are not frozen in emotional pain, you have moved into a space she cannot reach. This realization triggers a loss of power that is difficult for her to process. Narcissists define themselves through relational dominance. When that dominance disappears, they experience a kind of identity shock. She may feel disoriented, unsure of how to position herself emotionally. The role she played in your life and the role you played in hers has ended, and she didn't get to control the ending. This loss of control often leads to attempts to reassert it. She may manufacture reasons to contact you. She may appear to reasons to contact you. She may appear nostalgic, friendly, or even apologetic on the surface. But beneath these behaviors is a need to reestablish influence. She wants to see if she can still affect you emotionally. If she succeeds, even briefly, it reassures her ego. If she fails, the realization deepens. The power dynamic has permanently shifted. You are no longer available for emotional extraction. The most destabilizing part of this process is that your behavior forces her to confront accountability, even if she never admits it. Your silence removes all external distractions. There is no argument to blame, no reaction to twist, no emotional outburst to reinterpret. What remains is the reality of her choice and its consequences. Narcissists avoid accountability by externalizing blame, but when the other person refuses to participate in the drama, blame has nowhere to land. It turns inward, even if only briefly, and that is profoundly uncomfortable. As she realizes you are truly gone, the emotional tone shifts from irritation to anxiety. Anxiety about having miscalculated, anxiety about having lost something irreplaceable, anxiety about no longer being chosen. This anxiety doesn't always look dramatic. It can appear as restlessness, impulsive decisions, or sudden changes in behavior. She may seek constant stimulation to avoid sitting with the feeling. She may jump quickly into new connections, hoping to recreate the sense of control she lost. But the absence you left behind is not easily filled because it wasn't superficial. What she ultimately realizes, often too late, is that your strength came from not needing her validation to function. That independence is what made you valuable, and it's what makes your departure so final. By not reacting, you communicated a boundary without words. You showed that betrayal has consequences, not through punishment or revenge, but through withdrawal. That withdrawal is what forces reality to hit, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a weight she cannot escape. And while she wrestles with the loss of influence, you gain clarity. Your lack of reaction isn't suppression, it's resolution. You didn't disengage to manipulate her, you disengaged to protect yourself. That difference matters. It's what allows you to move forward cleanly without emotional residue. For her, the realization that she no longer has access to your emotional world lingers far longer than she ever expected. Because silence, when it comes from strength, speaks louder than any words ever could. Once a narcissistic woman realizes that you are truly gone and no longer emotionally accessible, an internal conflict begins that she cannot easily escape. On the surface, she may appear composed, confident, even indifferent. But beneath that exterior, a war erupts between her ego and the emotional reality she is desperately trying to suppress. This internal struggle is not about love in the healthy sense. It is about identity, control, and the terrifying possibility that she misjudged her own power. Her ego immediately goes into defense mode. It tells her that she did the right thing, that betraying you was justified, that she had better options, that you were flawed, inadequate, or replaceable. This narrative is not accidental, it is survival. For a narcissistic personality, admitting error feels like annihilation. Accountability threatens the very structure of her self image. So the ego doubles down, repeating the story louder and more aggressively the moment doubt creeps in. The more she insists she is unbothered, the more tension builds underneath. At the same time, an emotional undercurrent begins to pull in the opposite direction. She feels your absence in ways she didn't anticipate. Not as heartbreak, but as disorientation. You are a constant reference point in her emotional world. Your attention, your reactions, your presence provided stability, even if the relationship itself was turbulent. Without that reference point, she feels unanchored. Small things start to affect her more than they should. Moments of quiet become uncomfortable. Validation from others feels fleeting and hollow. The contrast between what she tells herself and what she feels creates a pressure she cannot easily resolve. This is where the internal war intensifies. Her ego demands superiority, but her emotions register loss. The ego says, I can do better. The emotions whisper, then why does this feel so wrong? This contradiction is deeply unsettling. Narcissists are not accustomed to sitting with unresolved tension. They prefer quick fixes, external validation, distractions, new connections. But even when she surrounds herself with attention, something feels off. The excitement fades quickly, the reassurance doesn't last, and the absence of your grounded presence becomes more noticeable by comparison. As this tension grows, she may begin to oscillate between extremes. Some days she feels empowered and relieved, convinced she escapes something limiting. Other days she feels inexplicably anxious, restless, or irritable. These mood swings are not random. They are symptoms of an internal system struggling to maintain coherence. Her ego cannot fully silence the emotional reality, and her emotions cannot fully override the ego. So she swings between them, trying to find relief. During this phase, obsession can quietly emerge. Not obsession with reconciliation, but obsession with understanding why she no longer has access to you. She may replay conversations, analyze moments where she felt dominant, and search for signs that you were more attached than you appeared. She may check your social media repeatedly, not to admire you, but to measure herself against your apparent stability. Every sign that you are doing well intensifies the conflict. If you are supposed to be the one diminished by the betrayal, your growth makes no sense within her narrative. This is where envy can creep in, even if she never names it. Your emotional composure becomes a mirror she doesn't want to look into. It reflects the truth she avoids, that strength, not control, is what creates real power. And she realizes, often unconsciously, that she lost access to that strength when she betrayed you. This realization wounds the ego deeply. Narcissists don't fear loss in the way others do. They fear being outgrown. Being left behind emotionally is far more painful than being rejected outright. The internal war becomes more intense when she considers the finality of your departure. Narcissistic women often assume that people remain emotionally available indefinitely. They rely on second chances, lingering attachments, and unresolved dynamics to maintain control. When it becomes clear that you are not lingering, that you are not waiting for closure or explanation, the reality hits harder. There is no stage left to perform on, no audience to influence, no leverage to apply. The relationship did not end on her terms, and that loss of narrative control is deeply destabilizing. As the ego struggles to regain dominance, it may push her toward behaviors designed to restore a sense of superiority. She might exaggerate her happiness publicly. She might flaunt new connections. She might speak dismissively about you to others. These behaviors are not signs of healing. They are attempts to convince herself. The louder the performance, the greater the insecurity beneath it. Because if she were truly at peace, there would be no need to prove anything. Emotionally, however, this sense of loss continues to surface in subtle ways. She may feel a sudden pang when reminded of shared experiences. She may feel irritated by people who don't understand her the way you did. She may notice that conversations feel shallow, even when attention is abundant. This is when the internal dialogue becomes more personal. She may begin to wonder, not openly but quietly, whether she underestimated you, whether she took your presence for granted, whether the version of herself she was with you felt more grounded than she does now. This questioning is dangerous territory for a narcissistic personality. It threatens to expose vulnerability, regret, and self doubt. So she oscillates again, sometimes leaning into the doubt, other times rejecting it completely. She may feel moments of longing followed immediately by dismissal, moments of curiosity followed by contempt. This push and pull is exhausting, but it's familiar. Narcissists are accustomed to internal chaos. What they are not accustomed to is losing the ability to resolve that chaos through external control. As time passes, the internal war leaves its mark. She may become more reactive in other relationships, more sensitive to perceived slights, more demanding of reassurance. The loss of your steady presence has removed an emotional buffer. Without it, her insecurities are closer to the surface. She may find herself triggered by things that never bothered her before. This is not because she suddenly changed. It's because the structure that kept her regulated is gone. If she considers reaching out to you during this phase, it is rarely from clarity. It is from conflict. Part of her wants to restore the old dynamic, to feel powerful again, to confirm that she still matters. Another part fears rejection, indifference, or exposure. The risk of reaching out becomes symbolic. If you respond emotionally, her ego wins. If you don't, the loss becomes undeniable. This tension can keep her stuck for a long time, replaying scenarios without acting, trapped between desire and fear. What makes this internal war particularly painful is that it cannot be shared openly. Narcissistic women rarely admit inner turmoil. They protect their image at all costs. So this conflict plays out privately, in moments of solitude, distraction, and rumination. Others may see confidence and composure, but inside there's a persistent unease. The certainty she once felt about her choices is gone, replaced by a lingering question she cannot answer. Why doesn't he need me anymore? That question strikes at the core of narcissistic identity. Being needed validates existence. Being irrelevant threatens it, and your emotional independence. Your ability to move forward without her forces her to confront a reality she avoids, that her value is not inherent but relational, and that relationships can end without her consent or control. Meanwhile, you are no longer part of this war. That is the most significant shift. By choosing self respect and emotional withdrawal, you removed yourself from the battlefield entirely. The conflict she experiences now is internal, self generated, and unresolved. You are not punishing her. You are not seeking validation. You are simply absent. And that absence creates a space where her ego and emotions collide without external interference. In time, this internal war may soften, but it rarely resolves cleanly. Narcissistic personalities do not integrate lessons easily. They compartmentalize, repress, and move on, at least on the surface. But the memory of losing someone who walked away with dignity lingers. It becomes a reference point, a quiet reminder that not everyone can be controlled, and not every loss can be reframed as a win. For you, the contrast is stark. While she battles internally to preserve an image, you rebuild externally with clarity and purpose. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to revisit the past. The war you avoided by walking away is the war she continues to fight alone. And that difference between inner conflict and inner peace is what ultimately defines the outcome of betrayal. When a narcissistic woman finally reaches the point where she considers coming back, it is almost never at the moment when reconciliation would have been possible. It happens later after time has passed, after distance has settled in, after you have emotionally detached and rebuilt your sense of self. This timing is not accidental. It is a result of how narcissistic psychology processes loss, regret, and power. By the time she understands what she lost, the version of you who would have accepted her no longer exists. At first, she doesn't feel urgency. Narcissistic personalities assume availability is a constant. They believe emotional access can be reclaimed when convenient. Even after betrayal, she often carries an unconscious certainty that you are still there, emotionally speaking. That certainty allows her to delay reflection. She distracts herself with new attention, new stories, and new validations. In her mind, the door is still open even if she is not walking through it. This belief protects her ego from facing the consequences of her actions too quickly. But time does something that emotional arguments never can. Time removes leverage. As days turn into weeks and weeks into months, she begins to sense a shift. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. You stop checking in. You stop appearing emotionally available. Your name stops coming up naturally in conversation. Mutual connections no longer treat you as someone who is hurting or waiting. Slowly, the emotional thread she assumed was permanent begins to dissolve. This is when the idea of coming back starts to form not from love, but from loss. The realization arrives quietly. You are no longer emotionally frozen in the moment she left you. You are moving forward. This realization is deeply destabilizing for a narcissistic woman because it challenges one of her core assumptions that people remain attached indefinitely. She begins to sense that if she waits too long, access may be gone permanently. And this is where regret enters. But it is important to understand what kind of regret this is. It is not remorse for betrayal, it is regret for miscalculating power. She begins to remember the relationship differently now, not through the lens of boredom or entitlement, but through comparison. New connections feel shallow, attention feels conditional, validation feels inconsistent. She starts to recognize, often unconsciously, that what she had with you was not as easily replaceable as she assumed. Your emotional steadiness, your predictability, your grounded presence. These things gain value only after they are gone, and because narcissistic personalities struggle to appreciate stability in the present, they often recognize it only in absence. This is when the impulse to return becomes stronger. She may tell herself she is just checking in, being mature, or seeking closure. These rationalizations allow her to reach out without admitting vulnerability. But underneath those justifications is a deeper need to restore access, to reclaim relevance, to confirm that she still has influence in your emotional world. Coming back is not about rebuilding something new, it is about re entering something familiar. What she does not anticipate is who you have become in the meantime. While she was avoiding accountability and seeking distraction, you were processing reality. You faced the betrayal directly. You felt the loss. You rebuilt boundaries. You recentered your life around purpose, self respect, and emotional independence. This internal shift is invisible to her at first. She assumes that time softened you, not strengthened you. She assumes distance made you lonely, not clear. And this misjudgment is what makes her return so late. When she finally reaches out, the dynamic is no longer what she remembers. Your energy is different. You are calmer, less reactive, less invested in outcomes involving her. You may be polite, neutral, or even kind, but you are not emotionally available in the way you once were. This is profoundly confusing to her. She expected to step back into a familiar role, but the stage has changed. The emotional hopes she once relied on no longer land. Her words don't carry the same weight. Her presence doesn't shift your internal state. This is when the true loss becomes undeniable. She realizes that the version of you she had power over no longer exists. The man who would have chased, explained, reassured, or absorbed emotional chaos is gone. In his place is someone who does not need her validation to feel whole. This is the ultimate consequence for a narcissistic woman, not rejection, but irrelevance. She didn't just lose the relationship, she lost access to the version of you that made her feel significant. Often, she will attempt to escalate at this point. She may become more emotional, more nostalgic, or even more apologetic. She may reference shared memories, highlight her growth, or subtly suggest a future together. These efforts are not always manipulati.